Kate Middleton had long been known for her poise, grace, and an unwavering commitment to her role as the Princess of Wales. She had spent years in the public eye, dutifully representing the royal family with dignity and decorum. But even the most composed individuals have their limits, and when a controversial liberal-leaning television show crossed a line with shocking comments about her on live television, Kate decided she had had enough. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. It all started during an evening broadcast of The People's Voice, a talk show that prided itself on being raw, unfiltered, and at times deliberately provocative. The hosts were known for pushing the boundaries of political discourse, often targeting figures from the royal family with satirical jabs and biting critiques. But on this particular night, they went too far. As the cameras rolled and the segment about the British monarchy began, the panelists, two outspoken television personalities and a celebrity guest, launched into what was supposed to be an irreverent discussion. However, what started as a lighthearted critique quickly spiraled into something far more insidious. One of the hosts made an inflammatory statement about Kate, implying things that were not only untrue, but deeply damaging to her reputation. The accusations were baseless, laced with personal attacks, and designed to stir controversy. The moment the words left the host's mouth, social media erupted. Viewers took to Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to express their outrage. Hashtags like #RespectKate and #ShameOnTheShow began trending within minutes. Clips of the segment spread like wildfire, reaching millions before the night was over. The backlash was immediate, with even staunch critics of the monarchy condemning the comments as tasteless and irresponsible. Kate herself was at home when she learned of the incident. Her phone buzzed relentlessly as advisors, friends, and members of the royal press office sent her links and messages of support. At first, she was tempted to brush it off. After all, she had spent over a decade weathering the storms of media scrutiny. But as she watched the clip and saw how cruel and baseless the remarks were, something inside her shifted. This wasn't just about her. It was about setting a precedent. If she allowed this to slide, it would open the floodgates for even more reckless defamation, not just against her, but against other women in public life. By morning, Kensington Palace had already released a carefully worded statement denouncing the remarks as false and defamatory. The statement also hinted that legal action was being considered. As expected, the show's producers initially dismissed the uproar, claiming they were simply exercising their right to free speech. But Kate was undeterred. This time she was going to fight back. Within days, her legal team filed a defamation lawsuit against the network responsible for The People's Voice. The lawsuit alleged that the show's hosts had deliberately spread misinformation with the intent to harm her reputation. Legal experts speculated that this was one of the most significant lawsuits of its kind, as members of the royal family typically refrained from taking legal action against the press. But Kate's move signaled that the old ways of simply ignoring and moving on were no longer acceptable in an era where misinformation could spread unchecked. The public overwhelmingly sided with her. Prominent figures in media, politics, and entertainment spoke out in her defense. Even some celebrities who had previously criticized the monarchy acknowledged that the attack on Kate had been unjustifiable. Calls for the show's cancellation intensified, with thousands of viewers boycotting the network and major advertisers pulling their sponsorships. Under immense pressure, the network executives convened an emergency meeting to determine how to handle the crisis. At first, they attempted to stand their ground, issuing a half-hearted apology that only fueled further anger. But when their viewership plummeted and advertisers began severing ties en masse, they realized they had no choice. A week after the controversial segment aired, the network announced that The People's Voice had been permanently canceled. The statement cited unprecedented backlash and legal implications as the reason for their decision, though it was clear that they had been forced into it. The show's hosts issued public apologies, though many suspected they were more concerned about salvaging their careers than expressing genuine remorse. Kate's victory in the courtroom was just as decisive as it had been in the court of public opinion. The legal proceedings were swift, and the ruling was in her favor. The court found that the defamatory statements made on live television had indeed caused harm, ordering the network to issue a formal retraction and pay substantial damages. Rather than keeping the settlement for herself, Kate donated the entirety of the funds to charities supporting mental health awareness and media literacy, ensuring that her legal battle had a lasting impact. In the aftermath of the lawsuit, discussions about responsible journalism and media ethics gained momentum. Networks and talk shows became more cautious, understanding that even public figures had limits to what they could endure. Kate's decision to take legal action had not just protected her own dignity, it had set a precedent that reckless defamation, even under the guise of entertainment, would not be tolerated. Her victory was more than just a personal triumph. It was a moment of reckoning for an industry that had long relied on sensationalism at the expense of truth. And as she continued her duties as the Princess of Wales, Kate carried herself with the same grace and composure as ever, knowing she had drawn a line in the sand, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been unfairly maligned by the media. The legal battle between Kate Middleton and the People's Voice was just the beginning of a larger cultural shift in how public figures, especially women, were treated in media discourse. The fallout from the lawsuit reached far beyond the television industry, sparking discussions in political circles, universities, and media watchdog groups. For years, the press had operated with the unspoken assumption that individuals in the public eye, particularly members of the royal family, were fair game for speculation, criticism, and even outright falsehoods. Kate's lawsuit shattered that assumption. The case had set a dangerous precedent for media outlets that thrived on sensationalism. If the Princess of Wales could successfully sue for defamation, who was to say that other high-profile figures wouldn't follow in her footsteps? Journalists, talk show hosts, and television executives suddenly found themselves second-guessing their words, afraid of stepping over the newly drawn line. For some, this was a much-needed reckoning, an overdue moment of accountability in an era of rampant misinformation. For others, it was a chilling sign that freedom of the press was being threatened. Predictably, certain factions of the media attempted to reframe the narrative, suggesting that Kate was using her influence to silence her critics. Headlines in more sensationalist tabloids read, "Is this the end of free speech and royal power strikes again? How Kate Middleton took down a TV show." Some claimed that the lawsuit was merely a flex of royal privilege, arguing that celebrities and politicians had long endured similar treatment without resorting to legal measures. But these arguments struggled to gain traction. The reality was that the comments made on the People's Voice had gone far beyond criticism. They had veered into outright defamation, something even the most vocal free speech advocates had difficulty defending. More importantly, Kate's actions inspired others to take a stand. Within weeks of her legal victory, several other public figures, women who had long endured harassment, false narratives, and damaging gossip, began exploring legal action against media outlets that had profited from their pain. High-profile actresses, politicians, and business leaders voiced their support, recognizing that what had happened to Kate was part of a much broader problem. The lawsuit also reignited conversations about the role of social media in amplifying defamatory claims. While traditional news outlets had always had editorial oversight, platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok operated with far fewer restrictions. Misinformation could spread rapidly, reaching millions in minutes. Kate's legal battle, though directed at a television network, raised pressing questions about how these platforms should be held accountable for allowing falsehoods to circulate unchecked. As pressure mounted, tech giants scrambled to adjust their policies. Within months, several major social media companies announced stricter regulations regarding the spread of defamatory content. Fact-checking initiatives expanded, algorithms were adjusted to limit the visibility of unverified claims, and new tools were introduced to allow public figures to challenge misleading narratives. While these changes didn't entirely solve the problem, they signaled a shift in how digital platforms handled misinformation. Meanwhile, Kate remained characteristically silent on the matter in public. She did not grant interviews, release personal statements, or engage in media-fueled debates. Instead, she allowed her legal victory, and the broader impact of her case, to speak for itself. Those close to her knew that she had never intended to become a symbol for responsible journalism or ethical media practices. She had simply wanted to protect herself and her family from baseless attacks. But whether she had intended it or not, she had become a figurehead for a new era of accountability in media. Behind the scenes, the royal family was watching the situation closely. Historically, they had adhered to the never complain, never explain philosophy, preferring to maintain a dignified silence rather than engage in legal battles. But Kate's decision had opened a new door, one that other members of the monarchy might one day walk through. Some royal commentators speculated that this was the beginning of a more proactive approach to media relations within the institution. No longer would they remain passive in the face of defamatory attacks. Instead, they would meet falsehoods with legal force. The cancellation of The People's Voice was met with mixed reactions. For those who had long criticized the show's reckless approach to commentary, it was a well-deserved consequence. The network's executives scrambled to recover, issuing statements about their commitment to ethical journalism. But it was too late. The damage had been done, and the show's brand had become irreparably tainted. Former sponsors distanced themselves, and some of the hosts struggled to find new opportunities in media. The fallout extended beyond the network. Other talk shows, blogs, and media personalities found themselves re-evaluating their content. Editors instructed their writers to be more careful with their wording. Talk show producers enforced stricter guidelines for discussions about public figures, and online influencers began issuing disclaimers with their content. Even those who had built their careers on provocative or inflammatory commentary took a step back, fearing they could be the next ones to face legal action. Despite this, some skeptics continued to push the idea that Kate's lawsuit was an overreach. A few media critics insisted that holding television hosts accountable for their words was a slippery slope that could lead to censorship. Yet, as the months passed, it became evident that this was not the case. The press remained free to report on the monarchy, scrutinizing policies, analyzing public engagements, and even offering fair critiques. What had changed was the industry's willingness to tolerate reckless defamation under the guise of free speech. Meanwhile, Kate returned to her public duties with the same grace and dedication as before. She carried out engagements, attended charity events, and continued her advocacy work with children's mental health and early childhood development. If the lawsuit had affected her, she gave no indication of it. She remained composed, regal, and unwaveringly professional, but those who followed her closely could see a subtle shift, an increased confidence, a quiet assertion that she would not be a passive victim of media narratives. Her actions also had a profound effect on the younger generation of royals. Prince William, ever her staunchest supporter, stood firmly by her side throughout the ordeal. His own history with the press, having witnessed the relentless media harassment his mother, Princess Diana, endured, had made him particularly protective of his wife. Many speculated that Kate's decision to fight back was, in part, a message that their family would not allow history to repeat itself. Even Prince Harry, despite his well-publicized tensions with the royal family, reportedly expressed admiration for Kate's handling of the situation. His own struggles with the press had led him to take legal action multiple times, and though he and Kate had taken different approaches to their roles within the institution, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Both had seen firsthand the devastating consequences of an unchecked media machine. Both had, in their own ways, fought to change it. The cultural shift that followed Kate's lawsuit was perhaps its most lasting legacy. Universities introduced new courses on media ethics. Law schools examined the case as a pivotal moment in defamation law, and advocacy groups used it as a rallying point for discussions on responsible journalism. The phrase Kate's Law began circulating online, not as an official piece of legislation, but as a shorthand for the growing movement toward accountability in the press. Kate herself, however, never sought to capitalize on the lawsuit's impact. She did not endorse new regulations, did not publicly call for further legal measures, and did not engage in the ongoing discourse about media reform. She simply continued being the Princess of Wales, leading with the same dignity and quiet strength that had defined her from the beginning. In time, the scandal faded from headlines, other stories took its place, and the media cycle moved on, but the precedent remained. Talk shows became more careful with their words. Social media platforms took misinformation more seriously. And the next time a television personality considered making a reckless claim about a public figure, they paused, if only for a moment, to consider the consequences. Kate Middleton had not set out to change the media landscape. But in defending her own name, she had done something far greater. She had reminded the world that dignity, truth, and accountability were worth fighting for. And in doing so, she had left an indelible mark on the future of journalism, one that would be felt for years to come. Kate Middleton's legal victory against the People's Voice was more than just a momentary headline. It was a seismic shift in the media landscape. The aftershocks of the case rippled across multiple industries, from journalism to entertainment, from politics to the corporate world. For years, public figures, particularly women, had been subjected to an unrelenting barrage of media scrutiny, speculation, and at times, outright slander. But Kate's bold decision to take legal action and win changed the rules of engagement forever. In the immediate aftermath of the case, news outlets across the globe dissected every aspect of the lawsuit, analyzing its implications. The royal family's long-standing tradition of avoiding legal battles with the press had been upended, and commentators wondered if this marked the dawn of a more litigious monarchy. Some speculated that Kate had set a precedent that would make it easier for other royals and even politicians to take legal action against defamatory statements. One of the most significant consequences of the lawsuit was the conversation it ignited about ethical journalism. Universities and media think tanks hosted panel discussions on the balance between free speech and responsible reporting. Prominent journalists, some of whom had once dismissed the monarchy as an institution too steeped in tradition to be relevant in modern discourse, admitted that the lawsuit had forced them to reevaluate their approach to public figures. The idea that celebrities, politicians, and even royals were fair game had been challenged in a court of law, and the legal system had come down firmly in Kate's favor. As the dust settled, the network behind the People's Voice faced intense scrutiny, not just for the comments made on air, but for their broader culture of sensationalism. Investigative journalists uncovered disturbing patterns in the way the network operated, revealing that the show's producers often encouraged controversial takes to generate viewership. Former employees came forward with stories of behind-the-scenes manipulation, where guests were sometimes baited into making inflammatory statements. These revelations only further cemented public opinion against the show, confirming that its downfall was not just about one lawsuit, but about a culture of reckless, unchecked commentary. Meanwhile, Kate remained steadfast in her public role. Though she had not sought to become a champion for media accountability, she was now at the center of a cultural shift, and people looked to her as an example of dignity in the face of adversity. She continued her royal duties with an air of quiet confidence, unshaken by the media frenzy that had surrounded her case. Unlike other public figures who might have sought to capitalize on such a victory, she did not go on a media tour, did not write a tell-all book, and did not use the lawsuit as a means to push any particular agenda. Instead, she simply carried on. However, her silence did not mean she was unaware of the significance of what she had done. Behind closed doors, advisors within the royal institution began strategizing ways to protect other members of the family from similar media attacks. There were discussions about implementing stricter policies when it came to engaging with the press, as well as exploring legal options in future instances of defamation. The Queen herself, though she had upheld a lifelong belief in discretion and non-engagement with the media, privately acknowledged that Kate's actions had been justified. Public perception of Kate also evolved in the wake of the case. While she had always been well-liked, often seen as a graceful and dutiful member of the royal family, the lawsuit had revealed a steely determination that many had not seen before. She was no longer just the picture-perfect princess with impeccable fashion and a warm smile. She was a woman who had fought back against injustice and won. For many, she became an emblem of resilience, an inspiration to anyone who had ever been misrepresented or unfairly vilified by the media. The case also sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry, where television producers, YouTube personalities, and podcast hosts became increasingly cautious about their content. In the weeks following the People's Voice's cancellation, several other talk shows came under scrutiny for the way they handled discussions about public figures. Social media influencers, who often relied on controversy to drive engagement, found themselves facing backlash when they made unverified claims about celebrities. Lawsuits similar to Kate's began popping up in different parts of the world, as other figures realized they too could fight back against defamation. One of the more unexpected outcomes of the lawsuit was the way it influenced young women in media. For years, female journalists, commentators, and content creators had often been dismissed or ridiculed for calling out misogynistic treatment in the press. But Kate's victory validated their concerns, proving that these issues were not just about sensitivity or political correctness, but about real-world consequences. Schools and universities began incorporating discussions about media ethics into their curriculum, and young aspiring journalists were taught the importance of balancing investigative reporting with integrity and fairness. As social media continued to evolve, platforms faced mounting pressure to take a more active role in curbing defamation. In the wake of Kate's case, tech executives convened to discuss new policies regarding the spread of misinformation. Some platforms introduced AI-driven fact-checking tools, while others implemented stricter community guidelines for high-profile figures who were frequently targeted. Although misinformation still ran rampant online, the lawsuit had forced the biggest players in the industry to recognize that they could no longer remain passive in the face of reckless media attacks. Despite all of this, there were still detractors who argued that Kate's lawsuit had set a dangerous precedent. Some feared that it would encourage more public figures to silence the press, making it harder for journalists to do their jobs. But the key distinction in Kate's case was that she had not sued over fair criticism. She had sued over outright defamation. Her legal team had made it clear from the beginning that this was not about silencing dissenting opinions or shutting down free speech. It was about holding media personalities accountable for spreading harmful falsehoods, and that accountability continued to spread. Other high-profile cases emerged in the following months, as individuals from the world of politics, entertainment, and business pursued legal action against defamatory statements. While some feared this signaled the death of free expression, others saw it as the natural evolution of an industry that had, for too long, functioned without consequences. Kate's reputation remained untarnished throughout the ordeal. In fact, if anything, she emerged from the situation with even greater respect and admiration. Though she never publicly spoke about the case, the way she handled herself, with dignity, restraint, and an unwavering commitment to her values, only solidified her status as a modern royal who understood the power of both tradition and progress. For the royal family, the lawsuit became a turning point in how they approached their relationship with the media. No longer willing to be passive recipients of harmful narratives, they began setting clearer boundaries with journalists and broadcasters. While they still upheld their commitment to public service and engagement, they made it clear that defamatory statements would not go unchallenged. As time passed, the controversy faded into history, but its impact remained. The media industry, once a free-for-all where speculation and falsehoods could be passed off as entertainment, had been forced to take a hard look at its own practices. There was now an unspoken understanding that while public figures would always be subject to scrutiny, there was a line that could not be crossed. For Kate Middleton, life moved on. She continued her charitable work, raising awareness about early childhood development and mental health, attending state functions, and supporting her family. But though she never spoke about it, those closest to her knew that she had left an indelible mark on the media landscape. She had proven that, even in the face of public scrutiny, even when the world seemed determined to twist the truth, one could stand firm and fight back. And in doing so, she had changed the game forever. Kate Middleton's victory in court against the People's Voice did not just conclude a legal battle. It redefined the media's relationship with public figures. In the months that followed, journalists, television producers, and digital influencers adjusted their approach to commentary, knowing that reckless speculation could have real-world consequences. While responsible reporting continued to flourish, the days of unchecked sensationalist attacks on individuals in the public eye began to dwindle. For Kate, the experience had been transformative in ways the public would never fully see. While she had always been a symbol of grace and composure, the lawsuit had given her something new, a sense of agency over her own narrative. The royal family had long lived under the assumption that they must endure whatever the press threw at them, but Kate had proven that endurance did not have to mean passivity. The power to set boundaries, to demand accountability, and to reject outright falsehoods was a right that even royalty could exercise. Within the palace walls, this realization led to subtle but important changes in how media interactions were handled. Public relations teams within Kensington Palace began setting clearer terms with journalists, ensuring that interviews and coverage remained within ethical bounds. Private briefings with royal staff reinforced the importance of media literacy, particularly for the younger generation of royals who would soon inherit an even more digitalized world. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis would grow up in an era where misinformation could spread faster than ever before, and their mother's legal battle became a case study in how to navigate public life with both dignity and firmness. Meanwhile, legal scholars dissected the case, marking it as a turning point in defamation law. Law schools incorporated discussions about the lawsuit into their curriculum, citing it as an example of how high-profile individuals could hold media organizations accountable without infringing on freedom of speech. It was a landmark case not just for the royal family, but for any public figure who had ever been subjected to defamatory statements under the guise of entertainment. Despite the cultural shift, Kate remained as she had always been, dedicated to her work, to her family, and to the principles she upheld. She did not revel in the media attention surrounding her victory, nor did she seek to wield her influence against those who had wronged her. Instead, she returned to her charitable initiatives, focusing on causes close to her heart. Yet, whether she acknowledged it or not, she had done something extraordinary. She had set a precedent that could not be ignored. She had proven that even the most composed and reserved public figures could fight back when necessary. And most importantly, she had reminded the world that truth mattered, that in an age of misinformation and reckless speculation, dignity and integrity were still worth defending. Kate Middleton's legal triumph was more than just a personal victory. It was a pivotal moment in modern media history. It served as a wake-up call to an industry that had long blurred the line between fair critique and outright defamation. The shockwaves continued to spread across the worlds of journalism, entertainment, and public relations, shifting the very foundation of how media outlets approached figures of public interest. One of the most immediate and tangible consequences of the lawsuit was the restructuring of several media organizations. Networks that had once thrived on controversy and sensationalism found themselves revising their policies to prevent future lawsuits. Legal teams became more involved in editorial decisions, and content creators were required to vet their sources more rigorously before airing discussions on high-profile individuals. Many shows that had built their success on inflammatory rhetoric saw a decline in viewership as audiences became more discerning about the content they consumed. At the same time, Kate's quiet but firm approach to setting the record straight inspired a broader cultural discussion about the treatment of women in the media. For decades, female public figures had been subject to harsher scrutiny than their male counterparts. Their every move, outfit, facial expression, and personal life were dissected, often with an undercurrent of misogyny disguised as public interest. The lawsuit ignited conversations about how women, particularly those in positions of power or influence, were disproportionately targeted by tabloid culture. As these discussions gained momentum, global media watchdog organizations took steps to implement stronger ethical guidelines. Several industry leaders called for reforms in the way entertainment news was reported, advocating for stricter accountability in cases where public figures were defamed without cause. The case even reached political circles, with debates emerging in parliamentary sessions in the UK about whether existing media regulations were sufficient to prevent similar incidents in the future. Yet, despite the legal victory, the controversy, and the cultural reckoning that followed, Kate herself remained largely untouched by the noise. While the media continued to analyze the ramifications of her actions, she carried on with her duties, undistracted by the storm she had set in motion. To her, the lawsuit had never been about making a statement or setting a precedent. It had been about protecting her dignity and ensuring that her family was not subjected to baseless public attacks. Her ability to maintain grace in the face of controversy only strengthened her public image. Even those who had once been indifferent to or critical of the monarchy found themselves admiring her quiet strength. She had not sought revenge or retribution, only justice. And in doing so, she had achieved something far greater than just a courtroom victory. She had changed the way the media approached its power and responsibility. Kate Middleton had never needed to raise her voice to be heard. But when she did take a stand, she made history. and long after the case faded from headlines, its impact continued to shape the future of journalism, holding the press to a higher standard and reminding the world that integrity still mattered. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us. What are your thoughts on Kate Middleton suing the TV show? Do you expect cancellation? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.